Video games. They're everywhere. But does anyone know how they're actually made? Well, today we find out in the truth behind the video game design. Firstly, to know how video games are made, we must go back to where it all started. Now, there's a lot of debate when it comes to the first ever true video game, or whoever started it all. But for me, the game that really started it all was Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo Entertainment System. Super Mario Bros. Was an 8-bit game that changed gaming forever. Unlike the first ever video games like Pong and Tennis for Two that were barely even arcade games at the time, Nintendo stole the show with this attention-grabbing simple platformer with graphics designs people never thought possible at the time. Now, when we're talking about old school games, one important thing to mention is how bitmaps work and the reason 2D games look the way they look. Actually, the phrase video game refers to an RGB or red, green, and blue raster or a video game display device, meaning that every pixel seen on a screen can be analyzed by adding their values of red, green, and blue. Take this picture of 8-bit Mario here, right? If we zoom in on him, we can see his individual pixels that make up his whole character. Bitmap is characterized by the width and height of an image in pixels and the number of bits per pixel. This can also be shown by something called color depth, which determines the number of colors that a pixel and ultimately the image can represent. This means with more pixels, the games looked better, and over time, this just kept going up. 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit, 128-bit, and so on, until eventually we got to 3D gaming. Now, 3D games were extremely different from any old school 2D games that released in the late 1900s. But before I dive into 3D gaming, I want to describe the general workflow of how a modern game studio makes their games, and what the process might look like. Now, of course, I don't have any access to these modern companies' devlogs or pre-documents, but here's a general idea of how the process works. The idea is that the game development is split up into 3 big steps, or stages. First is pre-production. During this stage, you would start defining the main aspects of the game. This pre-production stage turns whatever dream or idea you have into an achievable goal. People normally get to this stage by pitching whatever crazy game ideas they have and turning them into something that can be seen as more of a project. Things like creating storyboards, planning out timelines, and figuring out a budget all come from this part of the process. This is the main concept, and it's normally in a super long and super detailed document used in professional studios that changes throughout the development process. The production stage is where the game really gets made, and it's the longest stage. This stage is split up into 5 different categories. Vertical slice, a glimpse into the game, pre-alpha, bringing the game to life, alpha, which is squashing bugs, beta testing, which is just testing and fixing any problems, and gold, publishing your darn game. This would be the first thing to consider when creating a game. The vertical slice step can be summed up into terms of how big your event will be, right? If you're looking for small meetings, private events, and workshops, then you would need a smaller dome than if you had a massive events like concerts or festivals. Pre-alpha would be where most of the content of your game is designed, and unimportant assets are cut. Artists, designers, animators, and programmers are the main workers during this step, since many of the vital gameplay elements are worked on. The alpha is where the game is playable from start to finish, with all the bugs and problems still left in, ready for testing. However, if there is any unfinished artwork or components needed for the game, it would be finished here. Speaking of testing, the beta stage is right before the game is finished and the deadline is set. This is where the game is fully playable and fixing all bugs and unseen problems to polish up the game. Some companies even release a beta of the game to the public to see what needs fixing and getting feedback from active consumers. Think of the Hello Neighbor alphas and betas, for example. There were multiple alphas and betas for the game before its official release, with many bugs and problems found by the people playing, which led to the great final release of the game. In contrast to this is why many game developers and YouTubers stopped developing their games. It's about poor usage from users that spread bad media online. Popular YouTuber Danny had a similar situation with his fan base that caused him to quit because people were demanding that he posts and develops his new game faster and faster, causing burnout from a negative audience. Finally, the gold stage is when the game is up and running, fully released to the public. However, most modern games do not end the process here. They have a final stage of production called post-production. We as gamers know this stage as the areas for updates, new models, characters, stories, DLCs, and everything else added after the game's release to keep it active and relevant. Adding features to keep people hooked and making the game better and better all the time shows that you have made a great game. Now there are a few things I would like to mention about the different types of video games. One of those being the difference between 2D and 3D games. The 2D and 3D games have changed throughout the years, but generally, having a side-scroller type feel with all the assets and things moving with you on screen. This means the game is in 2D, two-dimensional, and lacks any sort of depth compared to 3D games. This type of video game operates in 3 dimensions, allowing the player to move in any direction, up, down, left, right, and across the y-axis, meaning the flat ground. These games also tend to be more realistic since the characters and world have depth. Also, this is just a very brief explanation of these topics. I'm trying not to be here for like 3 hours just unpacking the ideas of 2D and 3D space in video games. Anyway, other thing I'd like to mention is the different genres of video games. When making a video game, this is normally the first thing people think about, as there's so many different types of game genres. Action, adventure, strategy, sports, RPGs, story games, roguelikes, and the list goes on and on. Every type of video game genre leads to a difference in gameplay, assets, interactables, and more that the player experiences. Let's take 2 of these genres for example. Roguelikes are procedurally generated randomized levels where when you die, the level and game resets you back to the start with mostly turn-based or grid-based movement. On the other hand, an RPG, or role-playing game, are all about exploring the world given to you, making choices within that world as the character you have chosen or are forced into. Things like leveling up your character and completing quests are major parts of these games. Finally, I wanted to talk about the game development and really dive into the side of game creation. There are 5 different things to think about when developing a game. Game engines, assets, animation, coding, and final effects, music, and sound. Game engines are the base of a developer's work. Think of it as the cook's kitchen, the place where all the development happens. There are 3 different engines every game developer must choose from: Godot, Unreal, and Unity. These engines work the same at a general level, however, Godot is superior to 2D game development, while Unreal Engine and Unity are more inclined towards 3D development. Once you have chosen the game engine, you must start making your assets for the game. Assets are the things you put in your games. These will be your characters, items, backgrounds, and really anything you create via drawing or modeling. Animation is what turns your lifeless 2D or 3D models into a character in motion. And there are 2 main ways to do this. 2D animation is either frame by frame, meaning you literally have to hand draw every frame of your sprite, or you can do rigged animation, which is where you basically put bones into the character models and assign different parts of your sprite to move individually. 3D animation works the same way as rigged animation. Now once you've had your assets made, you will need to create them in your game engine using nodes. Nodes are the game objects that you put in your game that are provided by the game engine, yet they do nothing by themselves. These nodes are provided with transformed components that allow you to move it around. These nodes are invisible by themselves, but adding components to your nodes allows you to do things with that game object. Things like introducing the sprite of a character is used with this feature. Some of these components are pre-made by the engine, while other things need to be hand-coded and scripted from scratch in order to get it working correctly. Speaking of coding, coding is a huge part of the game development and production process that can be sometimes glazed over when starting a game project. Coding is used for making the bulk of your characters, environment, and the entire game. This is how you can really make your game unique, because you can tell the game engine what you want to do do inside your game. Load a level, make a character, damage the enemy, collect an item, etc. Finally, the last thing to do is add the effects, musics, and sounds within the game. Final effects, music, and sound will tie your game together and finish it off. The two types of effects are shaders and particles. Shaders changing the way your sprite and character look inside the game engine. Particles are the lightning, slashes, explosions that add pop to your game when an action is done within the game. These can be thought of as just a group of models or sprites that you can spawn in using your game engine and that have been adjusted the color, transparency, or size of the sprite. And that's it. If you completed all these steps, well then, you've successfully made a video game. Honestly, when people think about making video games, they think about the short term and imagine that it's easy when it really couldn't be farther from the truth. Everything I just explained about the process of making a video game from a developer's perspective didn't even go into the ideas of character development, storytelling, or cutscenes. These are the type of video games that are made with only 1 or 2 people, no teams, and normally short 2D games that involve no dialogue or story, yet they still take an immense amount of time and effort to create. This industry has proven that this media was highly developed and gotten extraordinarily better over the years, yet I feel like people still can't see its worth when criticizing these video games. We need to appreciate video games more and see how we can interpret them differently. The current media seems to have more ruthless hatreds towards video games and taking the work put in them for granted, which in turn is affecting the way developers treat the space, which is why I'm hoping this video can help with that. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. Also, this was a school project, so please be nice in the comments below. I've never made a video like this, so I'm hoping it turns out at least half as good as I'm expecting.